This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
West African officials arrive in Mali for talks with the military following arrest of the president and prime minister. Volcanic aftershocks in eastern DRC raise fears of another eruption of Mount Nyiragongo. And America's top diplomat continues his mission to bolster a ceasefire holding over Gaza. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. And here's some more headlines coming up this hour. In business news, Nigeria's economy lifted by higher crude production and oil prices. And in your sport, inaugural Basketball Africa League playoffs set to kick off with 8 sides in quarterfinal action. Let's begin the hour in Mali, where West African officials have arrived in the country with the aim of trying to resolve an ongoing political crisis there. Mali's military detained the president, prime minister, and defense minister in what international bodies have called an attempted coup. The United Nations, the African Union, and several European countries have condemned the arrests. The UN has called for the group's immediate and unconditional release, saying those holding the leaders would have to answer for their actions. CGTN's Wilka Senyawa has that report.
Mali's interim president Bandao, Prime Minister Moktawane and Defense Minister Suleiman Doucouré were taken to a military base in Kati outside the capital Bamako on Monday, just hours after 2 members of the military lost their positions in a government reshuffle. The United Nations has strongly condemned these arrests, stressing that those involved will suffer serious consequences.
Colleagues in the UN peacekeeping mission there continue to monitor the latest developments and reiterate their strong condemnation of the arrests of President Bandao and Prime Minister Mokhtar Wane, as well as some other of their colleagues. This action has serious consequences for Mali and the region as a whole. Our colleagues are seeking to gain access to those detained as soon as possible and to ascertain the condition of their detention and obtain guarantees of their fundamental rights and freedoms as enshrined in international human rights law.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has expressed his deep concern over the detention of Mali's leaders. Guterres is calling for calm and their release.
Secretary-General is continuing to follow the evolving situation very closely. He's being briefed on the latest development. Mr. Guterres continues to call for calm and for the immediate release of detained civilian leaders of the Malian transition. We're working closely with the Economic Commission of West African States, ECOWAS, and of course the African Union and all other international actors that are supporting the ongoing political transition in Mali.
A delegation from the main regional decision-making body, ECOWAS, has arrived in Bamako. The body's special envoy will hold talks with the military, a move that aims to ease tension in the West African nation.
Of course, we're here because there are some few developments that ECOWAS is a bit worried. And as the team that is mediating, we need to come and listen to our people, what is happening. We cannot say anything very definite now until we have discussions with the people, the civil society, citizens of Mali, the military, and those who were in government. After this conversation, then we will have something definite to tell the media.
Mali has been in turmoil since an earlier coup in 2012, which was triggered by an ethnic Tuareg rebellion in the north. Islamist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State control large areas of the desert north and stage frequent attacks on the army and civilians. Wilka Senyawa, CGTN.
Well, let's head over to the DRC, where days after a volcanic eruption, residents of surrounding areas continue to suffer from the aftermath. The lava reached the northeastern city of Goma. The region has since been hit by tremors, including a 5.3 magnitude earthquake. So far, at least 32 people have died in incidents linked to the eruption. UNICEF estimates that over 100 children are still missing. Tremors are reported to have hit the region every 10 to 15 minutes. Cracks have appeared near Goma's main hospital and on a major highway near the airport. The eruption and subsequent tremors have caused thousands of residents to flee the area.
The population of Goma is traumatized by the earthquakes caused by the Nyiragongo volcano, so people are starting to flee.
I left for Bukavu and then Uvira to escape the volcano. I can't stand these earthquakes.
I decided with my family to cross to the other side of the lake in Bukavu. We can't stand the tremors.
Well, for an update on this developing story, we're now joined by Chris Ochamringa, who is live in Kinshasa for us. Hi, Chris. Can you tell us what the latest is after the volcano eruption in DR Congo?
Yes, Hannah, like you just heard from that earlier report, there have been earthquakes and tremors in Goma and neighboring Rwanda, and those earthquakes have damaged houses and roads. There are serious cracks on some of the roads there. We heard on Tuesday that a building, a two-storied building, collapsed in Goma, and we also heard the information that another one collapsed this morning. Now, there were people who were injured. Several people were badly injured. There's no official report about the casualties yet, but very many people are scared because the Congo Volcano Observatory has warned that this is an ominous sign that there could be another eruption. So people are very worried. Many people who had returned from Rwanda, to find their homes destroyed by the lava are very, very disappointed and scared about their life. The government is saying they're trying to relocate people to safer areas in Rwanda and other surrounding areas of the DRC, and so there's a process that is ongoing to try and help these people. We've also heard that some international humanitarian organizations have relocated from Goma to Bukavu, in South Kivu province, to coordinate the relief response from there because those areas are safer. They are very worried about these tremors and earthquakes that have been happening. We've also been informed that the volcanic experts have warned people to keep away from a red zone. A red zone is basically an area where lava that flowed from a previous eruption in 2002 piled up, and that area is said to have very toxic gases. Some people are reported to have died from inhaling these fumes, and so people have been warned to keep away from those areas. Hannah?
Chris, from this latest eruption and the aftermath that we're hearing about, what are the immediate needs of affected communities in the city of Goma?
The most immediate needs are shelter. There are more than 20,000 people who have been rendered homeless by this eruption, and so they have returned home to find, their houses destroyed by the lava, and so most of them need shelter. There's food and water, and they also need psychosocial support. Some of these people are traumatized because they came back home and found bodies of their relatives burnt beyond recognition, and so there are organizations that are specialized in offering that kind of support that are going to help these people. There's also need to rebuild the power line that was destroyed, the water pipeline, and there's also a road leading to a town known as Ruchuru in the north of Goma. This is a very important town because most of the food that is consumed in Goma comes from that area. Now, the lava that flowed from Mount Nyiragongo piled across that road, and there's no way that trucks or cars can pass through, and so authorities have to clear that road to ensure that food comes to the people in Goma. Thousands of people are very traumatized by this incident. Hannah?
Chris, with the significant efforts that are currently underway to help the displaced and also to reunite the over 100 children who are reported to still be missing, could you tell us, Chris, who is involved in the rescue mission in all these efforts, and what role would they be playing?
Okay, first of all, Hannah, it's important to note that Goma is the capital of North Kivu province. And North Kivu province has been, plagued by very many disasters for a very long time. One of them is the conflict in the east and the Ebola and other diseases. So that area has very many international organizations that have been supporting people. So what they're doing now is most of them are shifting from what they have been doing, supporting the people, to focus on this disaster of Mount Nyiragongo. There are organizations like the UN agencies like the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UNICEF, WFP, the International Red Cross, Concern Worldwide, just to mention but a few, that are all pooling together resources to try and see how they can help people in this huge relief effort. They've been holding a series of meetings with the Congolese officials led by the Minister of Health, Dr. Jean-Jacques Mbungani, to try and see how each organization focus is designated a role that they will play, because they all have their specialities. For instance, UNICEF deals with children and issues of nutrition, and so they've already set up transit centers to help the children who have been separated from their families. We've got reports that more than half of the children who were separated from their parents have been reunited with their families. So all these international organizations are going to have roles so that they don't duplicate the roles that they're going to play there. This is a very huge humanitarian effort that requires, very good coordination. And all these organizations that I mentioned earlier that have been in the DRC trying to help the country fight other crises are all turning their effort to help the people of Goma and the surrounding areas who have been affected by the eruption of Mount Nyiragongo. Hannah?
Thank you so much for all that, Chris. Chris Ochamringa speaking to us live from Kinshasa. Well, the Sudanese government is set to resume peace talks with a faction of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. The talks are set to take place in South Sudan on Wednesday. This comes after leaders from both the Transitional Sudanese Government and the SPLMN signed a declaration of peace. The declaration agreed to principles such as the separation of state and religion, as well as the formation of a single national army. The peace talks are aimed to end conflicts in Sudan's South Kordofan and Blue Nile regions. Well, the U.S. government has announced visa restrictions on Ethiopian officials over the conflict in Tigray. The Ethiopian Ministry of Finance has said that the country is ready to tackle any negative impacts of such a move by the United States. The State Minister of Finance spoke exclusively with CGTN and said that the unfair and ill-informed U.S. decision would not stop the country's transformative moves. Here's CGTN's Gurum Chala with that story.
Ethiopian authorities continue to reflect on the U.S. State Department restrictions aimed at authorities and on finance and security-related issues. First, the Foreign Ministry here has condemned the move by the U.S. and said it would injure the long-held ties between the two countries. Now, the State Minister of Finance, Eyob Takaling, says nothing can stop Ethiopia from making an important breakthrough.
The U.S. is talking about some security restrictions, financial restrictions, except humanitarian aid. It's their money. So whatever they want to do, they're entitled to it. But would anything stop Ethiopia from transforming, from prospering, from making a breakthrough country in Africa? None.
Eyob said the United States' decision is saddening, but he hopes that things would eventually change for the better. He said Ethiopia can only strengthen itself when faced with such hurdles, and it will never change its stance.
The country is on the brink of meaningful transformation. We're moving forward. We'll make it. If there are some challenges on the way, as I said, I'm not aware of it, and I'm not even paying attention to it. Probably unfortunate to those who are here, but I'm not too much interested into it.
The United States maintains that Ethiopia has done little to address the humanitarian and human rights related issues in its northern territory. Addis Ababa, on the other hand, remains firm that it's doing its level best to accommodate its citizens, from the provision of protection for the vulnerable to bringing perpetrators to justice and delivering aid to the most affected. Gurum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is still on his 4-day visit to the Middle East. Blinken met with Israeli and Palestinian leaders in Tel Aviv and Ramallah, respectively. He is expected to travel to Egypt later on this week. The diplomatic tour comes just days after an Egypt-brokered ceasefire was reached between Israel and Palestine. CGTN's Adel Amrouchi has more from Aguza.
The U.S. Secretary of State will be here in Cairo. He will start his meetings with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, and then will be followed by a joint one-on-one meeting with the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry. The main topic on the agenda is mainly the Palestinian crisis. He comes at a time after Egypt brokered the ceasefire between the Palestinians and Hamas in Gaza, and at the time also that Egypt and Jordan, both of them, are trying to push for the revival of peace talks with the Palestinians. So this is the main crucial file. Of course, Cairo also needs the United States to mediate in the Grand Renaissance Ethiopia Dam. This is also another file that Egypt for months have been calling the United States to take a leading role in. So these are maybe the two main issues that they will be discussing, of course, in addition to regional conflicts, including Libya, which is of a great concern to Egypt. These regional discussions are just the beginning of a series of talks with Washington, D.C. and the White House, specifically as relations between Egypt and the United States appears to be picking up and enhancing right after with the coordination that we've seen between Egypt and the brokering the ceasefire. We've seen President Joe Biden and the White House in general taking positive statements in favor of the Egyptian government for the first time in months since the appointment of Joe Biden.
Well, the Chinese foreign minister says Beijing is not competing with the West. Wang Yi made the statement while headlining an event hosted by the Munich Security Conference. He said countries should perceive China's development as progress for the whole world and not a threat. Su Huao has more.
The Munich Security Conference is one of the world's most prominent forums on the major issues facing international security. And for decades, the conference has been dedicated to advancing transatlantic cooperation between Europe and the United States. 3 months ago, the MSC assembled a group of key leaders for virtual meetings. That event was attended by U.S. President Joe Biden, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, among others. During the meeting, Biden said the world must prepare for long-term competition with China. In a similar fashion, Tuesday's event was also held online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But this meeting is a lot smaller and featured Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. He was joined by a select group of participants, including Federica Mogherini, former Vice President of the European Commission, and the Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Wolfgang Ischinger. And the focus this time is on China, specifically the challenges facing the relationship between China and the West.
In Europe, some define China as a systematic rival. This is something we cannot agree with. There is no one-size-fits-all models when it comes to a country's development model. Just like Chinese people use chopsticks, and in the West, people use knife and fork, each has their own reasons. Different social systems do not make each other rivals.
Wang says China will not export its systems or engage in systematic competition because China believes in diversity and pluralism, both of which, he said, are crucial drivers of human development.
Some people portray China's relations with the West as democracy versus authoritarianism. But we believe democracy, freedom, and justice are shared values of humanity and the common goals of all countries. They must not be labeled as the patents of few countries. When it comes to China's human rights protection, no one is a better judge than the Chinese people themselves.
The United States has said China undermines international rules and values. In response, Wang asked the question, what kind of rules are we talking about here? Are we talking about the UN Charter or rules set by a group of countries? He said if minority of countries try to impose their view on the majority, it is not real multilateralism. Well, CGTN, Beijing.
Time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up when we return. Somali leaders hold talks to pave the way for elections in that country. And China hits back after the U.S. calls for coronavirus tracing transparency.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Adnan Shirishi, Tunis, Cairo,
Sharia.
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, over 100 Libyan politicians have objected to a constitutional document the UN-led Libyan Political Dialogue Forum announced this week. In response, Libya's Western-based High Council of State passed a law to hold a public referendum on a different draft constitution. The country needs a constitutional foundation to prepare laws that could guide its upcoming general elections in December.
Currently, Libya has no constitution. That poses a challenge for the country as it prepares for its presidential and parliamentary elections this December. The United Nations-led Libya Political Dialogue Forum this week issued a recommended constitutional document, but 107 Libyan politicians have rejected this step.
There are many issues which have not been decided about this constitutional declaration. The 75 members whom the UN chooses in the political forum are regulating the means to elect the president and parliament. They voted on it and passed it. Now it will go to parliament, which is another complication. Will parliament convene with the right numbers of members? How will debates be like in parliament? And what if they don't pass it? We have had enough of transitional periods which only complicate the political scene. The UN should support permanent steps instead of pushing for a fourth transitional period.
In 2015, a committee of 60 members, 20 from each of Libya's geographical regions, got elected to form a constitution drafting assembly. By 2017, they produced a draft document that should have been put for a referendum. The Eastern Libyan bloc blocked that draft constitution from being subjected to a referendum vote. They suggested amendments, which the Constitutional Assembly rejected, considering itself an elected body representing all Libyans.
What is happening in Libya is exceptional. An elected body was assigned to formulate a constitution. A referendum should be in place. Instead, an appointed body is creating another document. There is a way out. They should take what Constitution Drafting Assembly made as a temporary constitutional foundation instead of the UN's, which the general elections should be based on.
On Monday, Libya's Western-based High Council of State passed a law to the Elections Committee to put the 2017 document for a public referendum instead of the UN's draft, which will not be subject to popular voting.
The current constitutional void in Libya could lead the country once again back to chaos. Libyans are divided over which document to choose for their current transition. Tunisia will be holding constitutional talks next week in hopes to bridge the current source of tension in the country. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
To Somalia now, where political leaders have reached an agreement that could pave the way for the elections. The country's Foreign Minister Abdirazak Mohammed says among the sticking points resolved was the formation of an election committee whose absence had prevented the election of new legislators back in December. President Mohammed Abdullahi Mohammed's term expired in February, but wrangling over elections meant a new group of lawmakers was not selected in December to choose a new president. In April, the lower house of parliament voted to extend the president's four-year term by another 2 years. The Senate rejected the move, provoking a political crisis. We're now joined by Abdi Shiri. He's a professor of political science at the International Islamic University in Malaysia. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Somali leaders have reached an agreement paving the way for elections. How important is this agreement to Somalia's stability?
Definitely, this is a very important milestone, although in my view, it shouldn't have gone to this level in the first place. Somalia is a very fragile nation, and more so in the political level. Somalia is a very fragile politically, and any person, including the incumbent president, the current president, should be aware of that. And what happened is that, if I give you a little bit of background, the current president, with very much due respect, really thought that Somalia is a strong nation and you can change it the way you like, from democratically a very strong, a very fragile democracy to a strong dictatorship. In that sense, I assume that's what the president had in mind. Looking at the things that he has done, including consulting with some of the dictators, including the Eritrean dictator and some of the other allies that he made. So although any positive thing is welcomed, it shouldn't go into this. And for the common man, it's a very much welcome news, because the common people, our people on the ground, people who are struggling with their livelihood, they are actually very happy with these small things that the politicians are doing. And I would like to thank the Prime Minister, who had actually eventually he came to know that this is something that is going to be very bad, to put the worst words, if he doesn't take a decisive. And also thanks to those people who said no to the 2 years extension, including our military, including some of our regional states, including the normal common people. So no common sense would agree that the current president wanted to change the whole fragile, as I say, system.
Professor, I would like to ask you about some of the sticking points. Which ones do you believe are absolutely crucial, and how have they been resolved?
Well, they are all well, in a common sense, normal people, for you and me, these are very simple issues. What the whole 1 year the politicians were struggling, including the presidents and the regional state leaders, what they were struggling with is actually how to form an election committee. And who selects it? Because as you know, in Somalia, we actually don't have a normal election of what we are thinking of a normal democracy. So the committee that eventually will elect the parliaments, the upper house and the lower house, is actually very crucial. So to my mind, this was one of the sticking points. The other one is who controls what. How do you come up with that committee? And is that committee will elect a parliamentarian who will eventually will vote for me as a president? And the game is not over yet. You know, this is an initial agreement which has not been signed yet, for your information. Nonetheless, the point that we say the sticking point still sticks, and we still on as you are aware. You know, you need to understand really the political fabric and the situation on the ground. This is not a country, unfortunately, that you can talk about a normal political disagreement like what has happened, for instance, in Kenya. Kenya is a very established politically, and when there was a disagreement...
Professor, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for your time. Professor Sharia, Professor of Political Science, International Islamic University of Malaysia. Well, China says the United States must also be open to WHO investigation if it wants complete transparency in the process of tracing the origins of COVID-19. The remark comes after Washington called for new studies into when, where, and how the pandemic began. Here's a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Let's move on to other news. For over a year, the world...
Some people in the US preach the truth, but there is always politics involved. As long as the pandemic is discussed, China will be smeared and attacked. They will ignore the many doubts over the origins of the virus and the painful facts of failure in fighting the pandemic. Spreading conspiracy theories and false information is a great disrespect to the scientific spirit and findings of the WHO expert group. It also smears and hampers united efforts across the globe to fight the disease. If the US wants a completely transparent investigation, it should, like China, invite WHO experts to the US and reopen its Fort Detrick military base and its other biolabs as soon as possible.
Well, let's cross over to Nigeria now, where a cholera outbreak has killed about 20 people in Nigeria's northeastern state of Bauchi. The government says around 322 people have been affected by the disease. CGTN's Dese Makinde tells us more.
Bauchi State Commissioner for Health, Dr. Aliu Megoro, confirmed the outbreak to journalists. He says the outbreak was first identified in April with a 37-year-old woman as the index case. Dr. Megoro says the disease has now spread to 9 local government areas of the state. Its outbreak is being attributed to intake of untreated water and open defecation. The government has set up isolation centers in affected areas as a response measure. It wants residents to ensure cleaner environments and improved personal hygiene. 600,000 people were immunized against cholera in Bauchi State in 2018. Tessim Akende, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Well, for over a year now, the world has been battling the coronavirus pandemic. Along the way, governments and bodies like the World Health Organization have faced several challenges. Now, a potential treaty could help the world be better prepared for future pandemics. Asatal has the details.
In 2020, the world was hit by the coronavirus pandemic. The only comparable event was the Spanish influenza, which took place around a century ago. The pandemic continues to present challenges for not only governments, but the World Health Organization. Now, a global pandemic treaty looks to ensure that countries are better prepared in the future.
This treaty on pandemics would be rooted in the constitution of the World Health Organization. It will support the principle of health for all. And through this treaty, our main goal is to foster a comprehensive approach to better predict, prevent, and respond to pandemics, to strengthen global capacities and resilience, to ensure fair access to medical solutions, and to bolster international alert systems, data sharing, and cutting-edge medical research.
The proposal for a global pandemic treaty was initiated by the EU and later supported by the WHO. The coronavirus pandemic has shown the gap between rich and lower-income countries. Vaccine distribution has been among the major stumbling blocks. Over 120 countries have supported waiving intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines.
One of the greatest drivers of this pandemic has been the lack of international solidarity and sharing. Sharing data, sharing information, sharing pathogens, sharing technology, and sharing resources. We can only address that fundamental weakness with a binding commitment between nations to provide a solid foundation for enhanced cooperation.
A consensus has been reached for a special session of the WHO to be held in order to negotiate the international treaty. The WHO chief stated that it was up to member states to determine the scope and content of any international agreement. The special session is set to take place on November 29th until December 1st of this year. Astatal, CGTN.
The business news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Nigeria's economy lifted by higher crude production and oil prices. And S&P Global and Fitch keep South Africa's credit rating outlook unchanged.
taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Time now for the business news. There's some positive news coming out of Nigeria, where that economy grew just over 0.5% in the first quarter, lifted by higher crude production and oil prices. That's according to data from the country's stats bureau. Africa's largest economy slipped out of its second recession since 2016 in the fourth quarter, despite a full-year contraction in 2020. And CGTN's Deji Badmus now tells us Nigeria was already grappling with low growth even before the pandemic triggered a recession and created large financing gaps, including dollar shortages and inflation.
The data is clearly an indication that Nigeria's economy is growing, albeit very slowly. The National Bureau of Statistics says though the 2021 first quarter growth rate was slower than the 1.87% growth rate recorded in the first quarter of 2020, it is higher than the 0.11% recorded in the fourth quarter of 2020. The key driver of the growth is the non-oil sector, which grew by 0.79% in real terms.
The impact may not be significant, but what is important is that we are still in a positive growth territory. And when we talk about a GDP growth performance of less than 1%, which is what we have, it shows that the economy is still struggling to recover from the shocks of the pandemic and even the recession that followed the pandemic.
The growth in the non-oil sector threw up surprises. It was mainly driven by the manufacturing, agriculture and information and communication sectors.
The first surprise has to do with the performance of the manufacturing sector, which posted a GDP growth of 3.4%. In the last quarter, before the one that was reported, I'm talking of Q4, it recorded a contraction of 1.5%. And given what we know about the manufacturing sector, about the experiences that they have had in the last 1 year, especially around the foreign exchange liquidity, around the challenges at the ports, the purchasing power, the inflation, and the security. We never expected that we can have such a significant growth number from the GDP.
Growth in the oil sector was still negative, but the level of contraction in the first quarter is a far improvement from that of the last quarter of 2020, as oil production increased to 1.72 million barrels per day, over the 1.56 million barrels per day recorded in the first quarter of last year.
So this contraction is high level of improvement, and it reflects what is going on around global oil prices till this moment today. So I would say that while it's still in the negative territory, it's a significant improvement for Nigeria. And it also means that it's very hopeful that Nigerian authorities will not complain in terms of revenue generation like it was done in Q4 2020.
Then it's also a bit disturbing that some sectors have remained in recession, particularly the hospitality, recreation and entertainment sectors. They are still practically in recession. In this latest figure, they still posted a negative GDP growth. Hospitality posted a contraction of about 4.6%. The entertainment and recreation sector also posted a negative of 1.3%. This is very disturbing because these sectors have been down for over a year.
With Nigeria's population growth rate estimated at around 3%, economic experts say the country needs GDP growth rate above that figure. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Credit rating agencies S&P Global as well as Fitch have maintained South Africa's credit score at 3 notches below the coveted investment grade status it once had. Both agencies affirmed that South Africa's sovereign credit rating at BB negative. S&P kept its outlook at stable, signaling that it expects no change in the near future, while Fitch kept its outlook at negative. This could mean that the next move is more likely to be down. CGTN's Angela Coppola explains.
Fitch has also affirmed South Africa's long-term foreign and local currency debt ratings at BB-. It maintains a negative outlook. The decisions didn't come as a surprise.
Largely, that's because things have improved on the fiscal front. And on the growth front. So growth has been contracted less than expected, and it looks like it's going to rebound by more than expected. And over and above that, we saw revenues come in a whole lot better than expected, and also Treasury overissued.
There have been some tailwinds that have helped South Africa's case, most obviously a return of appetite for emerging markets and specifically commodity price buoyancy. I think that that's played in our favor.
National Treasury raised over 100 billion rand, but there were concerns about where that cash would be used.
They're using that cash to pay down debt, which means our issuance this year has been reduced dramatically and far more than investors had expected. And this is important, one, because it gives Treasury credibility, which it desperately needs, and two, because it brings down, because you've got less supply from a supply-demand dynamic, it means that your debt service costs are coming down.
In the short and medium term, there are two issues that need to be dealt with. Public wage increases need to stay below 2%, and public debt must be stabilized.
And we're given no indication of how we get from 2023-24 to debt stabilization. It's not clear to us. So that needs to be clarified. And I think once that's done, it could be quite positive for GDP growth.
The rating agency's announcements are helpful in another way.
We know what needs to be done, and we know where the ratings agencies stand. For the economy then, and for investors, for confidence, I think that is helpful. There's nothing in it, to me, that translates into reasons for optimism or buoyancy, that we could take confidence or clarity or direction from it, but certainly not optimism or buoyancy.
Analysts are saying there's enough policy in place. It's now time for implementation of those policies so that the country can begin to grow and pay off its debt. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Egyptian parliament has ratified a cabinet decision to raise minimum wage and pensions. Public sector employees could see their minimum wages increase by up to 11%, pensioners by 13%, in addition to a 7 to 10% average annual raise. The decision would be applied in the new fiscal year starting from July the 1st. Yasser Hakim reports.
Abdurrahman is a logistics officer at a state-owned petrochemicals company. Married with a child, he welcomes the new minimum wage.
For sure, it will make difference for me, for my family. For example, if the limit was 2,000, and I am ready to make my budget for my life, for my lifestyle, to get some things. So sure, it will be increased for lifestyle, for my child, for the medical, for the medical, for everything. Not only for food.
The new minimum wage is $154, up from $128. It also comes with an 11% annual salary raise and bonuses for all civil servants. There's a 13% increase in pensions as well. 16 million people will benefit from the new scheme.
This decision will help a lot of Egyptians to keep and to be capable for the lifestyle, and also to get their needs and their wants. Encourage all youth to work, and also will give them hope that the things will be better in future.
Aware of the huge burden civilians had to carry with aggressive 5-year austerity measures, followed by a COVID-19 induced recession, the government has doubled funds for social welfare programs too.
There is around $2 billion in the new budget to help citizens sustain the latest economic effects, like the Takaful Karama program launched by the president for the unemployed and low-income earners, as well as Dignified Life program to develop poor villages.
Raising minimum wages and pensions for the next fiscal year are costing the government about $5 billion.
The state budget has an average annual deficit of $25 billion, and lately, because of the coronavirus, revenue has been lower. The funds are coming from state budget and will cover through debt instruments, local and international. The government is targeting around $63 billion in the next fiscal year through foreign currency bonds and through treasury bills from local banks.
The latest salary raise applies on civil servants because the private sector has asked for a rain check. Most businesses say they're still recovering from the economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic and cannot afford more expenditure at this point. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Time for another short break. When you return your sport news, here's a headline. Inaugural Basketball Africa League playoffs set to kick off with 8 sides in quarterfinal action.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Time now for your sport news. We start off in Rwanda, where the Basketball Africa League has reached the playoff stage. The remaining 8 teams will battle it out in the quarterfinals on Wednesday and Thursday. CGTN's Muhammad Abubakar reports from Kigali.
The 9-day thrilling group stage action of the inaugural Basketball Africa League came to a close, with 8 of the 12 teams that entered the competition progressing to the playoffs. Favorites Petro de Luanda of Angola and North African sides US Monastir of Tunisia and Zamalek of Egypt all finished top of their respective groups. Egyptian champions Zamalek, who played the last match of the group stage, will be the first to tip off the quarterfinals against FAP of Cameroon on Wednesday evening before AS Saleh take on Angolan champions Petro de Luanda. On Thursday, AS Douanes will take on Group A winners US Monastir before the hosts Patriots close the last 8 showdown against Ferroviario of Mozambique.
We're obviously very happy to get to the quarterfinals, but our objective wasn't to stop at this stage. We know we still have a lot of things to correct in our game, but we are happy to take it game by game. But like I said, we are here to compete, and we are looking forward to a match on Thursday.
First of all, I have a lot of respect for all teams here. I think all of them, just for the fact that they're here, they qualified. It means a lot because they have some talent, and especially on this FAP team, I think they compete like really well. So it's going to be a tough game and a game where we have to be focused for 40 minutes because they are a team of runs. They are a team that they can be very good in a short time, in short minutes. So it will be a difficult matchup for us.
The stage is set as the race to crown the first Basketball Africa League champion intensifies. Mohamed Abubakar for CGTN, Kigali, Rwanda.